All right, so today we're diving into Texas politics, but like with a twist, right?
Yeah, it's a deep dive into the deep pockets that are shaping Texas politics.
Exactly. And a huge thanks to you, our listeners, for sending in this YouTube video, Deep in the Pockets. It really shines a light on how a couple of billionaires are basically calling the shots.
It's fascinating, really. It's not just about the money, though. It's about the strategy, the ideology. It's about how these billionaires are using their wealth to impose their worldview on the entire state.
And it all starts with this crazy statistic, right?
Mhm.
Less than 2 million Texans voted in the 2022 Republican primary.
Which is mind-boggling when you think about it. That's less than a tenth of the state's population deciding things for everyone
It's
else.
like, are you kidding? That's a shockingly small number of people.
Yeah.
Talk about outsized influence.
Exactly. And that brings us to the stars of the show, Tim Dunn and Ferris Wilkes. These guys, oil money, incredibly private, are pouring millions into Texas politics.
Like something out of a political thriller.
Right. And they're not just writing checks to candidates, they've got this whole sophisticated operation going on.
Okay, so break it down for us. How are they exerting their influence?
So they're using PACs like Defend Texas Liberty. You know those guys, right?
Oh, yeah. I remember seeing their ads everywhere during the last election. It was inescapable.
Yeah.
Billboards, TV, the whole 9 yards.
Right, so they're funding those kinds of groups to control the message, and then they're using organizations like the Texas Public Policy Foundation, which is a think tank that's really effective at shaping legislation.
So they're basically controlling the money, the message, and the laws. That got concerning.
It is. And then on top of that, they've created this system to keep politicians in line.
You're talking about the Texas scorecard, right?
Yeah.
This thing blew my mind when I first heard about it.
It's incredibly effective, though. It basically grades politicians on how conservative they are, and the higher the score, the more aligned they are with Dunn and Wilkes' agenda.
And because it's public, it creates this insane pressure to conform. Politicians are terrified of getting a bad score, even if it means going against what their constituents want.
Yep.
It's like this invisible hand is guiding their every move.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder who's really in charge here, the voters or the billionaires. And the video even has this one former state senator saying that some politicians are so obsessed with their scorecard that they'll completely disregard the actual issue. They're just voting based on what they think Dunn and Wilkes want them to do.
That is wild. It's like they've created a system where they don't even need to tell politicians what to do anymore. It's all about the threat of a bad score. But it's not just politicians, right? They're going after established conservative groups, too.
Yeah, and the video gives this example of this state senator who actually co-authored one of the strictest abortion bills in the country, but then he disagreed with Texas right to life about end-of-life care.
And you're not going to believe this, but guess who funds Texas Right to Life? Ferris Wilkes.
Mm.
It's like, is this even about conservative values anymore, or is it just about absolute loyalty to Dunn and Wilkes?
It really raises questions about their motives. Is it about advancing a conservative agenda or about consolidating their own power?
And that's where things get really interesting, because it's not just about the money and the politics. It's about something much deeper. It's about ideology. And the video digs into this concept called dominionism. And, like, it sounds intense, man.
It's a belief held by some Christians that they're called by God to basically take control of all aspects of society, government, education, media, you name it. They want to be in charge of everything.
And they're suggesting that Dunn and Wilkes subscribe to this belief system.
The video highlights these clips from sermons given by pastors that have direct ties to Dunn and Wilkes, and they're talking about this idea of taking dominion and these 7 mountains that Christians are supposed to rule over: government, education, religion, family, business, media, and arts and entertainment.
So it's like they're not just trying to win elections. They're trying to create a whole new society based on their specific interpretation of Christianity.
Exactly. And it makes you think, what about everyone else? What about the people who don't share that worldview? Where do they fit in?
Right. It's one thing if you want to live your life according to those beliefs, but it's another thing entirely if you're trying to force those beliefs onto everyone else.
And that's where it gets really concerning. And one area where Dunn and Wilkes are focusing a ton of their energy is public education.
Yeah, the video talks about their plan to basically destroy the public school system, and they don't even try to hide it.
They want to redirect public funds to private schools, mainly through these voucher programs. Remember the Texas Public Policy Foundation we talked about? They're all over this issue. They're huge proponents of school choice.
Right, but the video also presents the other side of the argument, which is that this is all about defunding and dismantling public education as we know it.
Exactly. And then you have the story of James Whitfield, who was the first Black principal of Colleyville Heritage High School.
And he was forced out after speaking out against systemic racism.
It's hard to believe that advocating for more equity is so threatening to some people.
Well, the video seems to suggest that Whitfield was targeted for speaking out about race, which is something that Dunn and Wilkes are actively trying to suppress in schools.
Right, they're calling it woke indoctrination. It's like any perspective that challenges their very narrow worldview is automatically labeled as dangerous and worthy of being silenced. And it's been very effective, unfortunately. Teachers are afraid to teach about these issues, students are afraid to discuss them, and it's creating this chilling effect on free speech in schools.
It's one thing to talk about this stuff in the abstract, but when you see what happened to James Whitfield, this guy who was just trying to make his school a more inclusive place, it suddenly becomes very real.
It really highlights the human cost of this ideological battle that's being waged. So we've got these billionaires, they've got tons of money, they've got a system in place to reward conformity and punish dissent, and they've got this deeply conservative Christian worldview driving their agenda. It's a lot, and it's kind of terrifying, honestly.
So where do we go from here? What happens next?
Well, that's where things get even more unsettling.
It's like we're seeing this whole other side of Texas politics. And the idea that this could spread beyond the borders of Texas is kind of scary, don't you think?
Yeah, and it already is. The video talks about how Dunn and Wilkes were major donors to Ted Cruz's presidential campaign back in 2016.
Didn't they give him like a ridiculous amount of money?
$15 million. They were basically his biggest financial backers.
Whoa. Okay, so they're playing on the national stage too. What else does the video say about their national ambitions?
They've been getting more and more involved in local elections all over the country. We're talking school boards, city councils, even county commissioner races.
Which you wouldn't necessarily think about as being super high profile, but those local positions actually have a huge impact on people's everyday lives.
Exactly. It suggests they're playing the long game here. They want to influence policy at every single level from the ground up.
It's actually kind of brilliant when you think about it, but also terrifying. It's like they're not just trying to win one election, they're trying to change the whole game.
Right. And they're using their money to support media outlets and advocacy groups that share their ideology.
So they're creating this whole ecosystem where their views are constantly being reinforced and amplified. It's like their own little echo chamber, but it has the potential to drown out all the other voices.
Which is what's so dangerous about it. They don't want a dialogue. They want complete control. And speaking of dangerous, did you see that part of the video about the Texas scorecard website? The one that's titled Cowards in the Pulpit?
Yeah, that whole segment was chilling. They actually used the phrase, shepherds in the pulpits willing to kill the wolves. Literally.
Yeah.
I mean, who even says that?
It's incredibly disturbing language, especially considering where it's coming from.
Right, this wasn't just some random comment section. This was an article written by one of Tim Dunn's top political advisors, and it's posted on a website that he founded.
It makes you wonder what they're trying to incite. When people in positions of power start using violent rhetoric, it creates a climate where violence feels justified.
The video even shows some young people reading that article, and you can just see the fear in their eyes. They're being told that these powerful figures want to literally harm people who disagree with them. I mean, can you imagine?
It's designed to silence dissent and create this us versus them mentality.
So we've got billionaires with an agenda, a system that rewards blind loyalty, and now they're using language that seems to be inciting violence. It's a lot to unpack. What are we even supposed to do with this information?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The video doesn't really offer any easy solutions, and that's part of what makes it so powerful. It forces us to confront these really uncomfortable truths about the state of our democracy.
Okay, so it's not just about understanding the problem. It's about figuring out what we can do about it. So where do we even begin?
I think awareness is a good place to start. Just knowing that these systems exist and recognizing the tactics being used is huge. And then we can start asking the tough questions like...
Yeah, it feels like we're up against Goliath here.
You can feel that way, right? But I think the more we know about how this works, the better equipped we are to fight it.
So knowledge is power. What can we do with this knowledge? Where do we even start?
Well, we have to be informed engaged citizens, right? We have to pay attention to where the money's going, especially during election season.
You mean like actually looking at who's donating to campaigns and PACs and stuff?
Exactly. Don't just believe everything you see in an ad or on social media. Do your research on the candidates and the issues.
Which could be exhausting, but I guess it's important.
Absolutely. And don't underestimate the power of actually voting. Remember that statistic from the beginning of the episode? Less than 2 million votes in the Republican primary.
Yeah, wild, right?
If more people showed up and voted, it could completely change the outcome.
I never thought about it that way.
Every vote really does matter, especially in those smaller local elections that often don't get as much attention. Those are the elections that Dunn and Wilkes are pouring money into right now. They know that if they can control things at the local level, they can control the entire system eventually.
So voting in every election, even the small ones. Got it.
And then beyond voting, we have to be willing to talk to each other even when it's uncomfortable.
You mean like having those difficult conversations with people who don't necessarily see eye to eye with us?
Yeah.
Easier said than done, right?
I know it's tough, especially these days when everything feels so polarized. But we can't let the extremes dominate the conversation. We have to find a way to come together and talk about these issues in a civil and respectful way.
That sounds exhausting, honestly.
It can be, but we can't give up, right? We have to keep fighting for the kind of world we want to live in, a world where everyone has a voice, a world where a handful of billionaires can't just buy their way into power and impose their worldview on everyone else.
So it's about more than just Texas.
It's about the future of democracy.
Well said. This has been quite the deep dive. We've learned a lot.
We definitely have, and hopefully our listeners have too.
To our listeners out there, thank you for joining us for another deep dive.
And remember, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay engaged.
We'll see you next time.